Well, ladies and gentlemen, here on the Final Say Radio Show, when we want to get the expert in the area of foreign policy and military affairs in Asia, there is one place that I like to go, and that is to the International Assessment and Strategy Center, and specifically to Dr. Richard Fisher. I welcome you to the program, and I'm so glad that you could join us today.
I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm actually, the more I'm reading into some of these issues and trying to draw the correlations between the article that you had forwarded me, which was the Chinese test firing of a new long-range missile, I'm drawing a correlation and a very close time range to the Russian submarines that were in the Gulf and the bombers that were, I believe, up near Alaskan airspace. It's all about the same time frame, and it's all very troubling.
Indeed it is. For many years, I have been concerned about the potential for Russia and China to coordinate, at a minimum, nuclear coercive activities, if not actual military activities, designed to, let's say, scare the United States from defending democratic Taiwan from a Chinese attack. China and Russia, of course, as is well known, have a very deep military technology relationship. They have a unique agreement to monitor and demilitarize largely their common border. And it is known that China and Russia have deep strategic and military exchanges on a number of levels that could include work toward some kind of strategic coordination.
Now, I'm looking at, not in this article, we'll come back to the article on the test firing, but I just noticed in the article from, I believe it's the Washington Free Beacon also, yes, on the Russian incursion of the ship, that Russia is planning on selling upwards of 11 submarines to Venezuela. And I don't know if you noticed that, but
yes.
like I've mentioned, I think it's troubling that we see the growing rise of, the militarization of that region, and it's too close to home, in my opinion.
Indeed, I think many observers are very concerned. 11 submarines would be a huge addition to Venezuela's already growing military capabilities. Russia has already sold several Sukhoi 30 strike fighters to Venezuela. These are now the most powerful and most capable fighter aircraft in the region. Venezuela is also an ally of Cuba and is a leader itself in what it calls the Bolivarian bloc, which is dedicated at a minimum to reducing American influence in Latin America.
Now, you brought up Cuba, and I know, I believe it was 2009, possibly 2008, that we had an incident where Russian ships had stopped in Cuba. Do we know if anything, any kind of weapons were dropped off in Cuba that we should be concerned with?
Cuba has not had the resources to significantly upgrade its military forces. What it has been able to do, however, is increase the mechanization of its ground forces. There are more armored personnel carriers, different kinds of armored fighting vehicles, and also surface-to-air missiles. These are largely defensive in orientation, and also the Cubans can afford to buy a lot of them so that it can maintain a large army and thus help to mobilize its population. Cuba has not been able to buy 4+ generation fighter aircraft, well-armed frigates or destroyers, or submarines. But but the potential is there. I'm more concerned about Cuba buying new and less expensive weapons from China, especially if China succeeds in selling some of these same weapons to Venezuela.
Okay. Now, so the submarine force that Venezuela has, do they have nuclear submarines?
No, I believe they have about 2 to 4 non-nuclear submarines. But the addition of the Kilos would be a major increase in capability, because the most recent versions of the Kilo are extremely capable. They're very quiet, and they could also be armed with a supersonic anti-ship missile that is very difficult to shoot down.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so coming back to the Chinese test firing here, what makes this advanced system a greater concern than the concern that we already had?
Well, it is the first mobile missile that China will deploy that will likely carry multiple warheads. The exact number of warheads is not known. I've been told by friends that it could be as many as 10. Others estimate 6 or as few as 3, but of course a lower number would mean that it would also carry a number of penetration aids, things like decoys that would help to defeat missile defenses. But what this missile signifies is that China will be increasing its warhead numbers a little bit faster than before, than in previous years. That should concern the United States. It should concern the Obama administration, but the Obama administration appears intent on reducing the number of warheads that we have now, going down to about 1,500, possibly down to less than 1,000. That's what they want to do.
Do we know what the range is on their long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles? Can they? Well, I believe they could definitely reach the West Coast, but could they reach all parts of the United States at this point?
Oh, yes. The longest range ICBMs can all cover the United States easily.
Okay. So that's definitely that's troublesome. Now I want to bring. I've mentioned to my audience that the Pentagon is to prepare reports on the Chinese military each year, and you had so carefully pointed out that in 2011 the report was 83 pages, but the 2012, while we've seen the increase in the growth of the PLA, which is the People's Liberation Army, this year's report's only 43 pages. Do you have any reason why that would be the case?
Well, several reasons have been offered. The official reason is that the Pentagon passed a new rule to promote budget savings that would limit the number of pages for reports to be prepared for the Congress. The Congress demands that a great number of reports be prepared by the Pentagon every year. So somebody in either the Pentagon or the White House hit on the idea, well, we can save money by cutting back on these reports. Others have reported, as Bill Gertz has of the Washington Times and Washington Free Beacon, has reported that that this year's Pentagon report was reduced in addition for political reasons. There was a political decision made by the Obama White House to cut back on this report because they believe that the report antagonizes China and will prompt the Chinese to build more and spend more on their military.
Well, that's interesting because it seems to me that China hasn't slowed down at all. So I don't know exactly what any antagonism is going to, how antagonizing them is going to increase their rate of development.
Yeah, I mean, the Chinese tell us that the report makes them angry every year because they know that an informed populace, an informed American public, is more likely to support military policies that adequately defend our homeland and our overseas interests. If we don't have the information, then it's less likely that we'll support the programs that our military needs. So that's China's agenda. But they try to tell us that, oh, these reports, they're so antagonistic and they make us so angry. But there's absolutely no promise at all, no indication, not even from the Chinese themselves, that if we stop this report, that there would be any kind of positive development from their side. They just want a concession. They want us to be disarmed. That's all.
I agree wholeheartedly. Dr. Fisher, this is John Rappaport. You know, of the two reasons that you gave, I would tend to agree with the latter. It makes no sense, you know, saving money on a couple of pieces of paper, a little bit of time to prepare a report on threat assessment for the rising dominant power in the world is ludicrous, you know, for anybody to put out as a logical reason. For the president who, you know, we're heading into a mandatory significant reduction in our own military capability. So it would make sense to me that heading into a political season, the last thing he would want to do is to be seen as going weak. You know, he's going to want to, you know, likely pound his chest, and at least in my opinion, on some of his accomplishments like killing bin Laden. So to start seeing the Chinese as a larger rising threat at a time that he's cutting way back in the military would seem to me like the political reason why this report would not go forward. But I have a question for you on going back to the issues in Central and South America and the weaponry in general, including the Chinese weapons. A big concern that I have, I'd love your opinion on, is that to me the Cold War never ended. I thought the peace dividend concept itself was foolish at best and just wishful thinking. What I've seen is that it more and more is moving from a socialist to an Islamist playing field. And what I worry about is traditionally we fought the Cold War. To me, wasn't just a war between us and Russia. It was really an ideological war that was fought in small hot wars instead of a large hot war, and it was done through third-party proxies. So the question for you is, how do you see this potentially playing out when you look at the new playing field being largely Islamist and radicalized, and unlike our prior predecessors, there tends to be a lot of a suicidal undertone to the way these people embrace warfare?
Well, China is largely responsible for the looming age of nuclear terrorism. North Korea's, Pakistan's, and Iran's imminent nuclear missile capabilities are all due to the technology, provision, and political protection of China. It has been the policy of China to use these proxies to undermine not just the United States but the West in general. China does not care that Pakistan is basically a failed state. If the military in Pakistan lost control of the nuclear weapons, these could very quickly end up in the hands of terrorists who would use them against India, against Israel, against the United States. Iran is very capable of giving nuclear weapons to Hezbollah, which would use them against Israel, and Hezbollah is very active in Latin America now, even Venezuela. And North Korea has publicly threatened on a number of occasions to give its nuclear weapons to terrorist groups. So not only do we have to have defenses and policies to deal with these proxy states, we need a policy for the largest proxy handler, China. We need policies that if we are attacked by nuclear weapons from any of these proxy states, we need a way of apportioning blame to China, because these nuclear weapons will have been made possible by China.
I think that's a great point. And I think the Chinese don't, besides the fact that they hold so much of our debt, I don't think they worry about that because historically we've not played well. In fact, no matter which administration has been in power, all the way back to even Reagan, we have not, when we've had proxy wars played out against us, Iran, for example, we've let Iran get away with it now for over 3 decades, and others, and we've shown Chavez, for the most part, that we're going to play the same game with him as he embraces both our radical Islamist enemies, China, as well as our enemies throughout Latin and Central America.
Brett, I agree with you completely. If we can't demonstrate our resolve and end the threats from these proxies ourselves, what is to stop China from continuing to arm them and undermine increasingly our ability to defend ourselves?
Sure. Well, that was John, but I'll take credit. Dr. Fisher, I'm reading your article here, and I want to read this to our audience because, to my understanding, Barack Obama, his intentions are, through the START Treaty, to bring our arsenal down to somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 missiles. Now, I'm reading that U.S. intelligence agencies estimate there are between 300 and 400 warheads in the Chinese arsenal today. However, it's believed the arsenal could be much greater, especially with recent disclosures that China has built 3,000 miles of underground tunnels and nuclear facilities throughout the country. And further on in this article, when you're mentioning the amount of warheads that go into these ICBMs and the amount that they're looking to build, and you go further into the article, you're mentioning here that they could have upwards of 900 warheads by 2020. What that tells me is China alone, by 2020, if we follow through with the START Treaty, will have 3 times our arsenal. And they will be recently built weapons.
There is a retired Russian general named Alexander Yeltsin, who was the former chief of staff of the Russian missile forces. He remains close to Vladimir Putin and is a frequent commentator. In early June, he published an article assessing China's nuclear capabilities. Now, General Yeltsin, I think we can safely presume, has access to a great deal of information that normal people do not have access to, information that I do not have access to. General Yeltsin estimates that China already has 1,300 to 1,800 nuclear weapons. Warheads, bombs, I guess that would be all together. Yeah. So if you take his estimate, China today is already has an arsenal that exceeds that of the United States. And this will only increase toward the end of this decade if you believe that estimate.
And of course, they're building, and of course, like Russia, they're significantly increasing both the size of their navy. You talked about, the mobile weapons platforms, which is mobile naval weapons are some of the scariest because they're hard to find and very difficult to defend against. And they're also increasing their naval bases around the world, as is Russia.
China does not yet have bases, although they are thinking about it. And probably the first base, if you can call it that, will be established in a small island state off of Somalia called the Seychelles, probably within the next year or two. The Seychelles government has made some very public invitations for China to come in and create facilities because they're so close to the counter-piracy patrol areas off of Somalia. But I also affirm this. China is building a power projection capability to enable its military to operate on a global basis, as does the United States.
Now, Dr. Fisher, if you add the arsenals of China, Russia, I suppose you could think of the possibility that if we don't do anything about Iran, that they will be building up an arsenal. The possibility of the development down in Venezuela. It seems to me that we have the potential to be drastically outnumbered militarily, while we still have the world's strongest military force. I think that's a grave potential threat especially considering that most of our allies are in far worse shape than we are today, economically speaking.
Indeed, yes. There are possibilities of several rogue states gaining nuclear weapons and then possibly even coordinating attacks against the United States, which China will probably be aware of and use to its own advantage, perhaps initiating some kind of military action against Taiwan, against Japan in the South China Sea, at least initially.
Yeah, and John raises a good point here in the chat room. Are aircraft carriers and ships of that nature going to become obsolete as we develop the capabilities of missiles and things of that nature?
Luckily, there are antidotes to the new missiles. China, yes, is developing and has either just deployed or is about to deploy a novel anti-ship ballistic missile, which would come screaming down on a moving aircraft carrier at about 5 to 7 times the speed of sound. Very difficult to shoot down if you don't have a railgun. The railgun uses electricity to power an artillery shell, unlike a regular gun that uses a chemical propellant. Electricity can power the shell up to 5 times to 7 times the speed of sound, which is fast enough to shoot down these incoming missiles. And if the artillery shell is built like a shotgun shell, which is the plan, then you can put hundreds of shotgun pellets in the path of a missile, so you don't have to hit it directly with one shell. You have multiple opportunities to hit it and cause it to fail. So we could put 2 of these railguns on an aircraft carrier, and that would very much defend the aircraft carrier against all missile and all aircraft threats. Submarines are a threat that have to be dealt with in a far different way, but we know a lot about that already.
In fact, as you mentioned that, I see here that we're in the recent budget plan that we're calling for cuts of a purchase of 10 advanced P-8 anti-submarine warfare jets that would be needed for the detection of submarines in, say, the Gulf of Mexico.
Sure. Yeah.
So, this is all very troubling, Dr. Fisher, and I mean, it's fascinating to discuss it. I'm so happy that you could join us. But it just shows us how vigilant we must be as a nation. Our leadership has to be very careful, and then that is important that we're always one step ahead, because the second you're not, you certainly lose that advantage.
Absolutely. I agree completely.
Well, Dr. Fisher, I'm so glad that you joined us today on the Final Say radio show. Thank you very much, and we look forward to having you back again sometime soon.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and thank you for having me on your show.
Great. Take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you.